How do you raise strong women? How do you raise strong girls? If I think of the question that I've been asked more than any over the course of my whole life and career, of the many careers, that would be the one that I probably get the most consistently and with the most urgency from parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles or people who just love girls in their lives. And I want to share a couple of stories that I think will help you answer that question for yourself and maybe give you a couple of challenges as well. The first one takes place on a soccer field in Anchorage, Alaska, where I grew up. I played soccer for Girls Club, so nothing like the big competitive leagues that you see today, but I played defense, and there was a girl on an opposing team that we played regularly who played offense, and she would come charging down the middle of the field every single game and score on goal, and we would just part like the Red Sea. She was absolutely unstoppable. And I remember after a game where that same pattern happened, she came out and it was a rainy day and there was a puddle in the middle of the field and she charged down the middle of the field and we parted like the Red Sea and she scored on goal and her team won again. And I remember my dad came up to me afterwards and put his arm around me and very kindly, not in any kind of a harsh way or even a challenging way, but just said, hey, Megan really was strong today, wasn't she? And I was like, yeah, she always is. And he looked at me and he said, when she comes down the field like that, why don't you just run back at her? And I looked at him like he was crazy because she was like a demon on the field. But there was something in his question that lodged in me. And the next time that we played them on another sort of dreary and drizzly day, on that same soccer field, this kind of muddy soccer field, she came charging down my side of the field and I went running back at her and we collided, fell to the ground. Soccer field is silent. The parents are silent. This never happens in soccer for the kids. They're silent. And she never charged my side of the field again. That was a pretty formational moment. And that suggestion by my dad that wasn't pushy and it wasn't demanding and it wasn't in any way sarcastic or demeaning, but it just asked me to think about, hey, why am I getting out of the way? Why don't I run back at this challenge? So the first thing I think you have to do to raise strong women is to continue to challenge them as girls. And this requires you to go back and look at any kind of your own sort of perspectives on what it means to be a girl. To be a girl can mean so many different things, right? And teaching a girl to be strong doesn't mean that she can't still be feminine and still be beautiful. But look at where it is that you focus your attention and help her focus that attention on being strong. A second story, also from about that same timeline, maybe a couple of years later, my mom gets credit for this one. And by the way, I say this with total deference to the incredible athletic achievements of this group that I'm about to talk about. But when I was in junior high, I kind of wanted to be a cheerleader because the cheerleaders were cool and they were pretty and they were just, they were the popular girls. And I remember saying this to my mom. I had no background that would lend itself to cheerleading at all to start with. So perhaps this was part of her commentary to me. But I'll never forget this commentary either when she said, I hear that you want to be a cheerleader, but why do you want to be the cheerleader when you can be the person that somebody cheers for? Now, cheering for people is really important. I got the Spirit Award on my swim team, right? I totally believe that we all need to support each other, and that's part of the ethos of how we do things. So raise your daughter like that as well. But that question to me, again, posed as a question, helped me to put things in perspective. I wanted to go out and do those things that got the accolades. I didn't want to have my entire focus be on the accolades, right? Or on the cheering squad on the sidelines. I didn't want to be on the sidelines. I wanted to be doing the work. So I would think in that case, it really makes me think a lot about how we ask questions of our children, how we direct their attention. And for my own children, what I realize is those things that we've identified as values in our family are those things that we work to talk about. You can't ever assume that they're just going to automatically internalize what's important, right? But instead to really say, these are our family values. These are our family values. This is what we stand for. In our family, that's courage, that's curiosity, and that's compassion, right? And all of those have many, many different levels, but we talk about that. Courage, curiosity, compassion. Where do we show courage? Courage means being willing to fail and being willing to get up after you fail and So those are ways that you can kind of explicate that, but ensuring that you're asking those questions and supporting that. Yeah, hey, that's a great example. I think that's a really interesting example of showing courage and building courage, don't you? What do you think about that? And really engaging with them. Now I'm talking now more about these kind of tweens and teens sort of an area as well. So I think of another example, and this is not an example that came from my family, but the example that is given by Sarah Blakely, who is the founder of Spanx, where every day at the table, they would sit down at the table and her father would ask, "Where did you fail today?" Oh gosh, I mean, initially you might bristle, right? Because none of us want to fail and we don't want to fail in front of our parents, but they would celebrate trying hard enough that you couldn't quite get there. So you pushed yourself hard enough that you didn't quite make it. And celebrating that failure was, in fact, celebrating part of the path to success. The necessity to push ourselves hard enough to be willing to fail so that we ultimately can achieve our end goals. So, third thing, be willing to fail and teach your children that it's okay to fail as long as you are working towards success, pushing yourself towards that path to success. I think that's a really powerful thing. I'm going to give you another example now. This is from Madeleine Albright, and what she remembers growing up as a girl and how she raised her girls is sitting at the table and ensuring that at that table, they were having conversations about world events in that case. And they might even bring out a newspaper and read the newspaper together. Sometimes we'll keep The Economist. We've continued to order The Economist, even though we don't read it every single time that it comes out because it's so full of information. But it's not just full of information. It's information thoughtfully considered, generally without some of the biases that we have in the United States, because it's coming from, of course, from a British source. It's written at a much higher level of intelligence, and it really can provide a prompt to then have a conversation at the table, really honoring the voices that are at that table and honoring every child's voice at that table, encouraging everybody to speak up. So as you're talking to your daughters, you're asking them for their thoughtful opinions on maybe it's the new administration's executive order about DEI in the federal government, for example, or maybe it's about whether or not we should stop drilling in the Arctic. And if we do stop drilling in the Arctic, then what are some of the alternative energy options? Engaging them in thoughtful and educated conversation and making that one of your family values, because at some point at teens and tweens, they stop really necessarily caring what you think. But you say, hey, this is a family value. We're going to sit at this table and have our meal, which, by the way, is also part of raising strong women and strong men, is you have your dinner at the table and then having that conversation as a part of the dinner. We lately have been reading from an American history book that is really an excellent way of kind of going deeper into some of the parts of American history and then having that conversation at the table. And it turns out people actually are, although they might protest, pretty interested, but asking for the input from everybody at that table, including your young daughter, including your older daughter, including your young son. And if anybody is not speaking up, if their voice isn't being heard, if they're kind of holding back a little bit, asking them for their input, asking them for their opinion is really, really important. I like to think about this in another context, and this is going to be the last story that I'm going to share on this video, but I welcome your comments and your questions so I can continue to give you some ideas here. But I think of this as, we've talked about this as giving women a seat at the table. I think of this as giving girls a seat on the couch. I remember growing up how the men would all go outside and they would work around the barbecue grill and the women would all be in the kitchen. And I usually tried to go hang out with the men because generally I thought those conversations could be more interesting generally. And then sometimes all the men would go in and retreat into the living room, but there was this separation of men and women. And I inserted myself sometimes. Sometimes I would be kind of rushed away and sometimes I would be welcomed in. But I would say as those men go in and sit at the couch, if you ever see that happening, and it still happens, I mean, it's normal for that to happen. Sometimes we have different interests and we break off by gender. That's not a terrible thing. But as those guys are going to go sit at the couch, if you're one of the dads there, and even if you're not a dad, but you're sitting with somebody that has a daughter in the room, invite that daughter over to sit on the couch and bring her into that conversation. Why? Because then she gets comfortable with the idea that sometimes she'll be the only woman in the room. Sometimes she might be one of the few, and that her voice matters, her opinion matters. You want to hear what she has to say. So give girls a seat on the couch so that they can one day have a seat at the table. That's it for today. I'd love to hear your comments. I'd love to hear any questions, anything else that I can offer up that might help to bring up strong women in this world alongside strong men. It's always both and, it's not either or. So here's to strong women. May we be them and may we raise them alongside our strong boys and our strong men.